Hello guys, how's it going? I'm the Sneezing Monkey, and today I'm gonna talk about Left 4 Dead 2. I'm gonna talk about survival games in general, look at some stuff that's out there, and talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, what I think works, and the different types of survival shooters, I want to say. So let me start with Left 4 Dead 2. It's a great game in the sense because it really kind of invented the classic idea of the survival shooter, for me at least. That was the game that I played most from all these kind of survival shooters. It has a high amount of replayability, like you can play it again and again, and it doesn't really get boring. You can really dip into it, start with the normal difficulty, and it gets harder and harder the better you get, and it still remains fun, it's still challenging. So that's a really important point. The way it introduced the idea of co-op gameplay is also amazing. It was the first game that was a survival shooter that had like this drop-in, drop-out co-op. And I really enjoy that because, another friend comes online. I think he doesn't even have to ask you for permission. He can just join your game and you guys can play together. On top of that, you have a chainsaw, which is just an unbelievably awesome thing. It always reminds me of Doom in the old days, and here you just run through these crowds of zombies and maul them down, and you have blood splashing to the left and right. It's also very, very violent, and that brings me to the next point, because in Germany, where I grew up, it's actually censored. You don't see any blood, and the zombies, after you kill them, disappear instantly. When they fall to the ground, they are basically immediately gone. So that's a bit of a shame, because I'm not a friend of violence, but for a zombie game like this, the violence just really adds to the experience. It's a bit like a splatter movie. You can't do a splatter movie without like completely over-the-top violence that is just so way out of proportion that it's ridiculous again. So it has also in this game nearly an ironic aspect to it, I would say. So there's some misunderstanding there in the German authorities, to censor that stuff. They think it's not right. So anyway, just wanted to mention that, but I think it plays a big role in the experience, and it's much more fun. Another thing I want to mention is the balance between dying and just making it to the safe room. They got that perfectly right in this game. You just quite often make it hardly, like with your last breath and your last 2 or 3 bullets, you make it into the finishing zone, and you just arrive, you close the door, and you're like, oh my god, that was the most intense shit ever. Sometimes you also don't make it, which keeps it interesting, but most of the time it gives you that sensation, of making it and winning, which is really pleasing, and it's a great tool to give the player some feeling of success back in that. So yeah, really like it. Left 4 Dead 2, I think right now it's even in the Steam summer sales. It should be on like, I don't know, it's like £2 or £3 or something. And if you have a friend, or a few of them, buy a 4-pack, give it to these guys and play with them. It's an amazing game. It's really, really good fun. Sometimes it reminds me a bit of The Heist, or actually the other way around. The Heist reminds me of Left 4 Dead 2. Anyway, so I kind of want to ask the question in this video of what is a survival game? Because there are so many types of survival games out there, one of them being the horror survival, right? Everyone knows that. Left 4 Dead 2 is probably the best example, but there are also other games like Dead Space 1 and 2, the Resident Evil series, I think, has to be mentioned, but also games like Dead Island, which is very different again. It's set in this tropical setting, but again, still it is like a horror survival game in the wider sense. So there's already kind of a broad variety there of different games who do it differently and how they create like the sense of survival and the fear of not making it. And then there are other games, like for instance DayZ. I don't know how to call it really. Maybe we call it like a permadeath survival game, which is quite unique in that sense. I can't come up with any other example that does it exactly like DayZ. I mean, there are copies of it now, like Warzy or whatever it's called. But for some reason, it is quite unique, and it has to be mentioned nearly as a genre on itself. Nonetheless, it is a survival game in the wider sense. And then there are other games that wouldn't be called a survival game, but still have strong influences of survival in them, like maybe tower defense games, right, where it's all about just surviving and just protecting your one thing. But even other games that are much more abstract, like The Sims, maybe, you could say it has survival aspects because you need to eat, you need to keep your character going. You know, if you don't do it, he will die. And then, you know, games like Borderlands, Borderlands 2, of course, you know, is basically a survival game in the wider sense. But also Tomb Raider, the new game that came out recently, it uses actually the survival aspect as part of the narrative, right? You have to kill an animal to make it, otherwise you would starve or something like this. You have to make a campfire to grill your meat. You have to survive. So it's a driver for the narrative, but I wouldn't call Tomb Raider really a survival game as such. But it's interesting how that factor kind of plays into that. So I think we can agree that most games have one or the other aspect of survival games in them. However, I think probably I'm forgetting like a million titles and I'm really not considering it properly. So that's just kind of the history of stuff that I played in the past. If you have any other games, like let me know what your favorite survival game of all time is. And it can be anything, you know, even if it's just a game that has like a slight touch of survival. If that kind of did it for you and pushed you to the limit where you're like, oh my god, I'm not gonna make it, you know, like, I don't know, the Fallout games or something have this feeling sometimes. So just let me know what your favorite survival game of all time is. For myself speaking, I would say it is probably Doom 3. When I played that game the first time, I played it mostly at night. It was very intense, and it's also a very long game. You play it for many, many hours, and you go deeper and deeper into this base. I don't want to spoil the end for you if you haven't played it, but it's very dark, and it played beautifully with the flashlight and like this feeling of fear. So that's probably my favorite, I would say. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. You can leave me a like if you enjoyed that video. I thank you very much for watching it, and I see you guys next time. Bye.